Why was she even here? That was the question muttered across the Marine range, long before anyone dared to ask her directly. The sun at Fort Ashid wasn't kind. It cooked the sand until it shimmered like broken glass, baked the air until the horizon danced. Sweat rolled down helmets, evaporating before it ever reached the dirt. By mid-morning, even the steel targets looked weary. The scoreboard blinked red again. Another failure. Another Marine team defeated by the Centurion string, the 100-target gauntlet that had broken everyone before them. A few men laughed dryly, the kind of laughter that hides frustration. The kind that says, "At least it wasn't me this time." And then through the haze, someone moved. She wasn't part of the active rotation, not listed on the board, not even expected to be here. Just a quiet woman standing near the prep area, sleeves rolled up, hair tied low. "Mind if I borrow your rifle for a minute?" The words hung in the air. Every head turned. Hadley Lawson didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. There was something about the calmness that made men stop talking. She spoke the way soldiers do when they've already made up their minds. Sergeant Devlin Caraway, the instructor with 20 years behind a scope, blinked once and frowned. "Excuse me." Hadley didn't repeat herself. She simply stepped closer to the bench where his rifle rested, brushing dust from its stock. Her movements were deliberate, not cautious, not arrogant, precise. "Mind if I borrow your rifle?" she said again, "for a minute?" A chuckle came from the side. Corporal Jace Monroe leaned against a post, phone half raised, grinning. "This isn't Instagram, sweetheart." She didn't respond. Didn't even look his way. Her hand reached for the windage dial, turning it a single click, so subtle it looked like nothing. But Caraway noticed. "Don't touch that," he warned, but she'd already done it. The laughter continued, brittle and awkward, the kind that covers doubt. Hadley dropped to the prone position without hesitation. The dirt puffed lightly around her elbows. She exhaled once, slow and controlled. The noise from the others faded, drowned out by the sound of her own steady breathing. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Box breathing, a rhythm learned by those who live where panic gets people killed. The air was still, except for the whisper of wind through the flags. Someone muttered, "If she hits even one, I'll shut up." The challenge floated out into the dry air like bait. Behind them, the range tech reset the scoreboard, another blank slate. The Centurion string, 100 pop-up targets, 200 to 900 meters, shifting wind, no brakes, no mercy. And a record that no one had beaten, 67 out of 100. Hadley studied the rifle, her eyes flicking over its metal like she was meeting an old friend. A standard M4A6, dependable, rugged, and perfectly tuned to Marine specs. But every rifle has a personality. She treated it as if she could hear its breathing. 2 clicks off," she whispered. Caraway frowned. "What?" She looked through the scope. "Your zero's 2 clicks off. You pushed right yesterday and never brought it back." His jaw tightened. He hadn't told anyone that. Her voice stayed soft, just saying. Then she chambered around, checked the action, cycled the bolt twice, and looked downrange through the shifting mirage. The air was bending the horizon, and she was reading it like a language. A paper wind feather sat beside her, fluttering toward 11 o'clock. She didn't need a meter. The wind told her what she needed to know. Colonel Nathan Royce had been watching from the tower. He'd seen enough Marines break down under this test to know that failure was the usual outcome. When Caraway looked up at him, Royce gave a single nod. "Let her try." No further explanation. Orders given, orders obeyed. Caraway crossed his arms. "Fine, but when she misses the first shot, I'm calling it." Hadley didn't react. Her cheek settled against the stock. One small breath in, hold, out, hold. The crosshairs steadied over the first target at 200 meters. Silence. Then crack. Steel rang out across the field. A green light blinked on the board. Someone laughed in disbelief. Lucky shot. But the second target popped up before the first sound had faded. Crack. Another hit. Another green. Then another. And another. Each one cleaner than the last. By the 10th shot, no one was laughing. Monroe lowered his phone, his grin fatting into something else, disbelief, maybe admiration. The Marines nearby were still, as if afraid to move. The scoreboard glowed 10 green, no red. Wind shifting, Caraway muttered. 3 to 5 mph, quartering crosswind. Hadley adjusted her hold, not her turret. Didn't even flinch. At 400 meters, the mirage flattened slightly. She favored high. Hit. 500 meters, she favored right. Hit. She wasn't just shooting, she was listening. By the time she reached 30 targets, even the colonel's expression had changed, the trace of curiosity replacing doubt. Caraway leaned forward unconsciously, his arms unfolded, his voice dropped low. She's reading the wind like it's alive. Maybe it is, Royce murmured. Hadley's breathing never faltered. Every shot fell into rhythm with the air. The brass casings collected beside her, a neat little pile of evidence. 40 targets. 50. 50 greens. The Marines behind her began to murmur softly. She's not shooting, one whispered. She's negotiating with the wind. By 60, even Caraway's smirk was gone. He'd seen precision before, but not like this. Not with borrowed equipment, under heat that warped vision, in front of an audience of skeptics. Every shot was a conversation between calm and chaos. And Hadley always let calm speak first. Her eyes never left the scope. Her heartbeat never rose above a resting 55. The mirage shimmered. The flag snapped and swayed. She adjusted nothing. Only breathed. At 70, Caraway muttered under his breath, "No way. No one ever done this." Royce didn't answer. He was too busy watching history happen. At 80, Hadley paused just long enough to wipe sweat from her temple, not because she was nervous, but because she needed the lens clear. Her movements stayed deliberate, like a ritual. Every motion was an act of respect. She didn't fight the rifle, she partnered with it. Each trigger pull was measured in heartbeats, not seconds. 90 targets. 90 green lights. Now the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The final target rose 900 meters, 4 seconds. Hadley exhaled once slow, waited, watched the mirage shift, flatten, ripple again. She waited for that single still moment, the gap between gusts, and squeezed. Crack. Time stopped. Then came the sound, steel ringing, echoing like a bell across the empty field. 100 hits. No misses. For 5 whole seconds, nobody spoke. Even disbelief needed a breath. Then the range erupted. No laughter this time. Just shock, awe, and something deeper, respect. Monroe's phone slipped from his hand, forgotten. Caraway just stared, silent. Royce descended the tower with slow, deliberate steps. His boots struck the concrete like punctuation. He stopped beside her. She was calmly clearing the chamber, inspecting the bore, setting the rifle to safe. "Sergeant Caraway," Royce said evenly, "your rifle's performance just improved significantly." Caraway's throat worked before words came. "Sir," she corrected, "my 2 clicks, she was right." Royce turned to Hadley, explanation. She placed the rifle gently on the bench, the way one returns something borrowed. Yesterday's wind was east at 10 miles an hour. Standard correction, 2 clicks right. This morning it's west at 5. You needed to bring it back. No arrogance, no pride, just fact. Caraway could only nod. Behind them, the tech confirmed the impossible, telemetry, camera feeds, all perfect. 100 green, 0 red. Center mass, all within time limits. History. But Hadley didn't smile, didn't even seem to care. She just stood, brushed dust from her knees, and started packing her things. To her, it wasn't triumph, it was data confirmed. As she walked past the Marines, the same men who'd laughed an hour ago, none said a word. Their silence wasn't shame, it was reverence. Royce finally spoke, voice low. "We'll need you in the records office." She nodded once. "Of course, sir." When she walked off the range, the scoreboard still glowed. 100 green. No red. The kind of perfection no one believed could exist. Monroe turned to Caraway, voice barely a whisper. "What just happened?" Caraway exhaled, long and slow, a master class in listening. Far across the range, Hadley adjusted the strap on her rifle case. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the sound of the Marines still murmuring behind her. She didn't look back, because perfection wasn't what she'd come for. She came for silence, the kind that follows disbelief, the kind that teaches louder than words. And for the first time all morning, the wind itself seemed to quiet down, as if bowing to someone who finally understood how to hear it. What happens after perfection? That was the question no one knew how to ask. The range at Fort Ashid felt different that afternoon. The sun still burned the same, but the air carried a strange quiet, like the ground itself was still absorbing what it had witnessed. The scoreboard blinked once more, green after green, before the tech finally shut it off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of thoughts, disbelief, and something close to reverence. Hadley Lawson walked away from the firing line with the calmness of someone returning from a morning jog, not someone who had just rewritten the impossible. Her steps were slow, deliberate, her boots leaving measured prints in the dust. Caraway followed at a distance, saying nothing. He wanted to, but what do you say to the person who just outshot every record on the books with your own rifle? Inside the record room, the fluorescent lights hummed. Metal desks, static-filled monitors, and the faint smell of oil and coffee made it feel sterile, like reality had come to reclaim the myth that had just been born outside. The range officer hunched over his console, double-checking every log, every camera angle. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the data. "Confirmed," he said finally. "Center mass or better, all within regulation time." He looked up at Royce, eyes wide. "Sir, it's clean." Royce didn't answer right away. He stood near the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, almost a whisper. "Document it." Caraway cleared his throat, his voice catching halfway through. "Sir, permission to verify her adjustments." "Granted." He leaned over the data sheet, scanning the shot grouping maps. The precision was surgical, each hit within 2 inches of center. No drift, no random pattern, no luck. He whispered under his breath, 2 clicks. She called it exactly. Hadley stood off to the side, watching the process like an observer, not a participant. She didn't seem nervous, didn't even seem proud. Just patient. When Royce turned to her, he asked, "Was that instinct or calculation?" "Neither," she replied. "Observation." He raised an eyebrow. She continued softly, "You can't predict wind. You listen to it. You watch how it touches everything, the flags, the mirage, the heat. It's like conversation. You just respond truthfully." Caraway exhaled, shaking his head. "You make it sound like philosophy." "It is," she said simply. "Physics is philosophy that forgot how to feel." The range officer slid a form across the desk. "Sign here, ma'am, for the record." She took the pen, wrote Hadley Lawson in steady strokes, and slid it back. Just another signature, nothing grand, nothing dramatic, but the room felt the weight of it. Caraway's name followed. His hand shook slightly before he steadied it. Royce signed last, crisp, deliberate. With that final stroke, the paper became history. When Hadley turned to leave, Royce called after her, "Sergeant Lawson." She paused, looked back. You understand what this means? She nodded once. Yes, sir, it means the standard just changed. He studied her. You don't seem surprised. I've missed enough times to know this isn't luck, she said. It's payment for practice. Royce's expression softened slightly. And yet you act like it doesn't matter. Hadley's eyes dropped to the floor, her tone quiet. Perfection isn't a feeling, sir. It's an echo. It doesn't stay. The words hung there a moment, then she was gone. Outside, the Marines were still gathered in small knots near the bleachers, replaying what they'd seen. Phones out, whispers trading like currency. That was unreal. She didn't even use her own rifle. She just listened to the wind. Monroe stood apart from them, phone dangling uselessly in his hand. The recording had stopped halfway through. He hadn't even noticed. He stared downrange where the steel plates still shimmered. Everyone carried a fresh scar in its center. He'd mocked her, laughed even, but now his hands were shaking, not from shame but from awe. When Hadley approached, the crowd went quiet. She set her bag down and began breaking down Carraway's rifle, clean, oil, reassemble. Routine. Monroe cleared his throat. Ma'am. She glanced up, silent. Would you teach us? The words tumbled out awkwardly, like they were heavier than he expected. Hadley's gaze shifted toward Royce, who had followed behind them. He gave a slight nod. As an adjunct instructor, if she's willing. She looked at the group of young Marines, faces flushed with dust and humility. What do you want to learn? Monroe swallowed. Everything you just did. Hadley smiled faintly, a trace of something warmer slipping through. She pulled a small notepad from her pocket and scribbled something quickly before handing the page to him. Box breathing 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. Natural pause. Favor versus dial. Conserve motion. Practice until you owe the wind nothing. Monroe read it like scripture. The others leaned closer, photographing it, passing it around like a relic. Carraway approached, reading over Monroe's shoulder. His voice was low, sincere. Conserve motion, that's what I missed. I was fighting it. Hadley nodded. Fighting costs time, time costs accuracy, accuracy costs the mission. Her tone wasn't judgment, it was fact, and the truth of it landed harder than any lecture. A young lance corporal raised his hand timidly. Ma'am, did you ever miss? She looked at him, the corners of her eyes softening. Every day, missing taught me how to hit. The rifle doesn't fail. The wind doesn't lie. Only interpretation does. So I learned to interpret better. That answer silenced the field more than the gunfire ever had. The next morning, the sun rose over Fort Ashid with less arrogance. The range dust still lifted, the air still shimmered, but the energy was different. Marines arrived early, rifles cleaned, notebooks in hand. Hadley was already there, kneeling near the firing line, drawing wind patterns in the sand with a piece of chalk. Carraway stood a few feet behind, observing. He had the look of a man relearning his own craft. She spoke softly as the Marines gathered. Don't fight the rifle, let it breathe with you. It wants rhythm, not control. She adjusted a shooter's stance, lowering one elbow by an inch, sliding a bipod forward 3 centimeters, wrapping a strip of cloth tape around a stock for grip. Each correction was tiny, surgical, but every Marine felt the difference. They ran the half course, 50 targets instead of 100. Results climbed instantly, misses fell away. The scoreboard flickered green more often than red. Carraway watched from the tower, taking notes. His pride didn't sting anymore. It shifted into admiration. He saw what she was doing, teaching them to stop fighting physics. At lunch, the group sat together under the shade tarp, eating rations and laughing softly. Hadley sat among them, same as anyone else, sleeves still rolled, dirt on her knees. Monroe finally asked, How long did it take you to get this good? Hadley smiled. I'm not good, I'm practiced. Good has a ceiling, practice doesn't. The table fell silent, digesting the meaning. But you shot perfect, one Marine said. She shook her head. Perfect is an accident, repeatable is skill. It was the kind of sentence that stuck in a soldier's head long after the day ended. Later that afternoon, when someone asked how she'd known Caraway's rifle was 2 clicks off, she explained plainly. I didn't see it. I heard it in the pattern of his misses. 7 hits, 3 misses, all right-sided. Systemic error, not random. System errors have sources. You just have to listen long enough to find them. The Marines nodded, absorbing her words. To them it sounded mystical. To her it was method. That night the base was quieter than usual. The barracks lights dimmed early, and the range sat under a canopy of stars. Hadley stayed behind, sitting on the bench near the target line, notebook open. She wasn't writing scores. She was sketching wind currents, lines that curved like river paths. Royce found her there, silent in the dark. "Still working?" he asked. "Still listening," she said without looking up. He folded his arms, studying her. "You know, the commandant's already heard about your run. He'll want a statement." Hadley closed the notebook gently. "Let them write what they want. Records are for numbers. I'm more interested in what they learned." Royce tilted his head. "And what did you learn?" She thought for a moment. That silence teaches faster than shouting. That stillness wins more fights than speed. He nodded slowly. "I'd call that wisdom." "I'd call it survival," she murmured. When she finally returned to quarters, she unrolled a faded photograph from her bag. A man in uniform, older, smiling faintly beside a rifle range somewhere far from Fort Ashid. Master Sergeant Halden Ross. Her teacher. She placed the photo on the desk, whispered almost imperceptibly, "I listened, Ross, just like you said." The wind outside picked up, rattling the thin glass pane. It almost sounded like an answer. At dawn, she was back on the range before anyone else. The desert light painted the steel targets gold, the air still cool and soft. She walked the length of the field, touching the bullet marks left from the day before, her fingertips tracing the small dents, each one perfect, each one earned. When she reached the 900-meter plate, she smiled faintly. There was a single clean hole dead center. No splatter, no edge hit. Just stillness captured in metal. For a long time she stood there, eyes closed, breathing with the morning wind. Perfection, she thought, isn't the point. Understanding is. And somewhere in that silent expanse between dusk and dawn, she felt the presence of her mentor, quiet, approving, unseen. Sometimes dignity doesn't need applause. It just needs one perfect breath. What makes someone believe? Not in luck or talent, but in themselves. That was the unspoken question that hung over Fort Ashid as the second week began. The range had seen many instructors come and go, loud, confident barking orders that echoed through the desert. But this time, the lessons came in silence. Hadley Lawson didn't shout, she didn't command, she simply demonstrated. By sunrise, she was already on the line, setting up targets, measuring wind patterns with nothing more than colored chalk and a strip of cloth tied to a rod. She didn't need fancy tech, she used what the world gave her. Her Marines, because by now that's what they had become, gathered in quiet anticipation. No one joked anymore. No one questioned why she was there. They just watched, absorbing the way she moved, calm, deliberate, purposeful. Caraway stood behind them, arms crossed, a faint half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He stopped being the skeptic. Now he was the student too. "All right," Hadley said softly, crouching near the dirt. "Let's start where most shooters fail, the argument between you and your rifle." A few Marines exchanged glances. She picked up a random weapon, checked its balance, then placed it back down. "Every shooter here has the same rifle," she said, "but none of you shoot the same way. Why? Because you're not supposed to. The weapon doesn't adapt to you, you adapt to it. Then, eventually, you meet in the middle. She adjusted one Marine's cheek weld, then his shoulder placement. Don't force it. Let the rifle rest where it wants. It'll tell you when it's ready. Monroe asked quietly, "How does a rifle tell you that?" Hadley smiled faintly, "When it stops fighting back." She stepped away, motioning for the next Marine. Every correction was tiny, the kind most people would overlook. A bipod leg shortened by a centimeter, a hand rotated by 2 degrees, a breathing rhythm slowed just a little more. Precision, she said, isn't hitting the center. It's eliminating the things that stop you from getting there. The phrase stuck like gospel. Monroe scribbled it down word for word. The session ran long, dust clung to their boots, sweat stung their eyes, but the results showed fast. The Marines hit cleaner, steadier. Misses turned to near hits turned to solid contact. And every time a steel plate rang, Hadley didn't praise, she nodded once, silent approval, letting the sound itself be the reward. When the last round fired, Caraway called time. 50 targets, he announced. 37 hits average, that's progress. Hadley said nothing. She just looked downrange, scanning the pattern of hits. Not bad, she murmured, then looked back at them. But progress isn't comfort, it's correction. Monroe frowned slightly. Ma'am. She pointed to a missed plate at 700 meters. Tell me what that miss said. He hesitated. That I pulled left. Did you? She asked. He thought for a moment. No, ma'am, I didn't feel a pull. Then what changed? The wind. Exactly, she said. It wasn't you, you interpreted wrong, so listen longer next time. The young Marine nodded, almost embarrassed but grateful. Caraway stepped forward, adding, "She's right. A miss isn't punishment, it's feedback." Hadley smiled faintly. And feedback is free, it just costs your ego. That earned a few quiet laughs, the kind that comes from truth more than humor. By the end of the week, something had changed in the air. The same Marines who used to compete for kills now competed for stillness. They spoke softer, moved slower, fired fewer shots but hit more. Caraway watched from the tower again, jotting notes in a small green pad. Every few minutes he'd mutter under his breath, "Conserve motion," then smile. When Hadley finally called it a day, he climbed down and met her at the bench. "You changed the way they shoot," he said. "Hell, you changed the way I shoot." Hadley shrugged slightly. "I didn't change anything. I just showed them a quieter way to learn." Caraway studied her. "You really don't take credit, do you?" "Credit is noise," she replied. "I like quiet." He laughed softly. "Quiet's hard to find in this place." "Then you're probably listening for the wrong thing." Her voice had that same steady calm, not defiant, not proud, just peaceful. And that peace was starting to spread like wildfire. But peace rarely goes unchallenged. By midweek, a black SUV pulled up to the range. Inside sat an officer with a clipboard, pressed uniform, and the kind of expression that made air feel colder. Major Leland Care, Range Compliance Officer, Command Oversight. He wasn't here for training, he was here for validation. Caraway saw him first. "We weren't expecting an audit," he muttered. Royce joined them near the tower, eyes narrowing slightly. "Care doesn't make surprise visits for nothing," he said. "Let's stay sharp." Hadley noticed, too. Her group paused mid-drill as the major approached. He didn't greet her, he didn't smile. "Which one of you is the civilian instructor?" he asked. "I'm the adjunct," she said calmly. He scanned her up and down. "I've heard the stories. 100-400, seems convenient. No official recording of the full string." Monroe started to speak, but Caraway stepped in. "Sir, we verified telemetry and timestamps. It's clean." Care didn't even glance at him. "I'll see it myself." He turned to Hadley. "You mind recreating the miracle?" Hadley's gaze didn't flicker. "Miracle's a big word, Major, but sure." The Marines shifted uneasily. The test again, in this heat, under scrutiny. She set up without hesitation, reusing the same rifle. No adjustments, no hesitation. The same discipline, even calmer this time. Royce gave a quiet nod to the tech. Start the Centurion string. The targets popped in sequence. 200 meters, 300, 400. The shots came slow, steady, surgical. Each hit rang clear, each motion fluid. The wind shifted, but she didn't. 30 greens. 40. 50. Care's jaw tightened. Continue. 70. 80. 90. Her breathing never changed. Her face was serene, like the still surface of a lake. When the final target rose at 900 meters, she waited, breath squeezed. Clang! The board lit up again. 100, 0 red. Care stood motionless, clipboard against his chest. He checked the telemetry himself, ran through timestamps twice. Every metric clean, every hit confirmed. Royce finally broke the silence. Satisfied, Major. Care hesitated, then nodded curtly. Seems legitimate. He turned to Hadley. Where'd you learn? Where the wind still remembers the march, she said. He blinked. Excuse me. She met his eyes. It's not a place, it's a rhythm. He had no answer for that. When he left, Royce just smiled faintly. He won't forget that line. Caraway chuckled. Neither will I. That evening, the Marines gathered around Hadley under the dim glow of the range lights. The wind was calm, the air heavy with dust and quiet pride. Monroe finally asked the question that had been building for days. Why do you do it? Why teach? You could be anywhere. Hadley didn't answer immediately. She looked out toward the horizon, where the sky burned orange and violet. Because someone once taught me, and I didn't understand until he was gone. The group fell silent. They'd heard bits of her past, but never the story itself. She continued, voice low, almost fragile. He said shooting isn't about domination. It's about acceptance. The wind, the rifle, even yourself. He told me to listen until the silence made sense. Monroe swallowed hard. Who was he? Master Sergeant Halden Ross, she said softly. He never shot perfect, but he taught me that perfection doesn't matter, patience does. Caraway nodded slowly. Sounds like a good teacher. The best, she said. He used to say, teach them humility before life teaches it for you. Her eyes glistened for a moment, but she looked away before anyone could see. The Marines said nothing. They didn't need to. Every man there understood what it meant to lose a mentor and what it meant to honor one through practice. 2 hours later, as darkness settled, Hadley stayed behind again. The others had gone, but she sat at the firing line, watching the stars over the range. The night air was cooler, softer. Royce approached quietly, hands in his pockets. You know, Commandant, asking about a permanent instructor role. She turned, half smiling. Already. Already, they want you to build a new program. Your methods are spreading. Hadley's eyes drifted toward the distant targets, silver under the moonlight. Let's see if the lesson lasts before we make it doctrine. Royce nodded, understanding her unspoken point. You're not chasing titles. Titles fade, she said. Habits stay. He hesitated, then asked, Lawson, why did you really ask to borrow that rifle? She smiled faintly, a long pause before the answer. Because silence is louder than failure, she said, and I wanted them to hear what silence sounds like. The colonel said nothing. He didn't have to. The desert wind picked up again, sliding past the range with a sound almost like a sigh. Hadley closed her eyes and listened to the rustle of dust, the whisper of calm, and the quiet truth that had guided her all along. Sometimes leadership doesn't shout. It listens first and then teaches others how. How do you honor a moment that rewrites what people believe is possible? 2 weeks after the shot that silenced an entire Marine range, Fort Ashid looked different. Same dirt, same wind, same sun. But the air felt lighter, like it carried a new kind of respect. Inside the briefing hall, folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. Someone had bothered to wipe the dust off them. At the front, a projector hummed beside a podium draped with the Marine emblem. It wasn't a grand event, no banners, no fanfare. But everyone knew it meant something. Colonel Royce stood near the front, reviewing notes on a clipboard, while Sergeant Devlin Caraway adjusted the mic. The room filled slowly, Marines, instructors, even a few family members who'd driven in from town. Monroe sat in the second row, phone off for once. He didn't want to record this. He wanted to remember it. When Hadley walked in, the chatter softened to a hush. She didn't look like the hero of an impossible story. No medals, no dress blues, just her standard fatigues, sleeves rolled up, hair tied low as always. Royce smiled faintly as she passed. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She shrugged. "For what, sir?" "For being the lesson." The ceremony began simple. Royce stepped up to the mic, his tone steady, formal but warm. "2 weeks ago we witnessed something none of us expected," he began. "A civilian adjutant walked onto this range, borrowed a rifle, and changed what we thought could be done. 100 targets, 100 hits, 0 error." Murmurs rippled through the room. Even now, the number sounded unreal. Royce continued, "But this ceremony isn't about the record, it's about what happened after, when every Marine here stopped competing and started learning." He gestured toward the audience. "You all felt it, that shift, that quiet, that discipline. It came from one person who decided to listen harder than anyone else in the room." He turned toward her. "Hadley Lawson, please join us." Applause filled the hall, the sincere kind, heavy with pride. Hadley rose reluctantly. Her steps were measured, quiet. When she reached the podium, she adjusted the mic slightly but didn't speak right away. She looked out at them, the faces that once doubted her, now waiting for her words. "I learned to shoot," she began softly, "from a man who never competed." The room stilled. "He said the target doesn't care about your ego, and the wind doesn't care about your rank. The only thing that matters is your preparation." Her eyes flicked downward, then back up. "His name was Master Sergeant Halden Ross. He died 3 years ago. He never fired a perfect string, but he taught me that perfection doesn't matter. Discipline does. Consistency does." She paused, the silence around her almost reverent. "He taught me humility before the wind, patience before frustration, and respect before pride. Missing wasn't failure, it was information. You just had to use it." Monroe swallowed hard. The phrase struck him like a clean shot. Missing isn't failure, it's feedback. Hadley looked at the front row, the Marines she'd trained. "You already knew how to shoot," she said. "You didn't need me for that. You just needed permission to stop fighting yourselves." A few heads bowed slightly. Even Caraway blinked hard, jaw tightening. "That's all I did," she said quietly. "I gave you permission to cooperate instead of dominate." Her voice softened. "Master Sergeant Ross used to say, 'Teach them humility before life teaches it for you.' I'm grateful I got to pass that on here." She stepped back from the mic, a faint smile flickering, humble, restrained, but full of meaning. The room erupted in applause. Royce returned to the podium, waiting for the sound to settle. His next words carried a different tone, proud, reflective. "The Centurion string," he said, "was designed to be impossible, a test meant to expose weakness, not reward mastery. For years it did exactly that. Then Hadley Lawson reminded us that impossible often just means we haven't learned the right way yet." The projector flicked on, showing 2 side-by-side videos. On one side, footage of prior Marine teams, rushed, jerky movements, constant turret adjustments, frustration. On the other, Hadley's flawless run, stillness, rhythm, control. Royce narrated, "This is the difference between resistance and cooperation, between panic and patience. She eliminated the unnecessary. Every extra motion invites error. She conserved energy, conserved movement, and let precision take its place. He looked toward her again. Sergeant Caraway. Caraway stood, the weight of humility in every step. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. He turned toward the room. When she first showed up, I laughed. I figured she was another tourist with a steady hand and no grit. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. He smiled faintly. But I was wrong. She didn't outshoot us because she's better. She outlistened us because she's quieter. He paused, his voice catching for a moment. I taught Marines how to fight. She taught us how to flow. Applause followed, slow, strong, genuine. Hadley bowed her head slightly, deflecting the praise, her face calm but her eyes shining faintly. After the ceremony, the hall opened into a modest reception. Coffee in paper cups, pastries gone cold, but the energy was warm, laughter, gratitude, quiet pride. Hadley stood near the wall, speaking with a Marine's wife who held a small child on her hip. My husband came home calmer, the woman said softly. He's more patient, more steady. I don't know what you told him, but thank you. Hadley smiled, shaking her head. He did the work. I just reminded him to trust it. Nearby, Monroe and Caraway stood together, watching her. Ever seen someone change a whole unit without raising their voice? Monroe asked. Caraway smirked. Never, but I'll tell you what, every damn one of them shoots better now, including me. They clinked coffee cups like a quiet toast. Later that afternoon, Royce pulled Hadley aside to a small office just off the hall. The air smelled like dust and burnt coffee. On the desk lay a manila folder, her file, thin but freshly updated. The commandant wants to make it official, Royce said. Permanent instructor position. Full clearance, pay grade, and course authority. You'd run your own program. Hadley looked at the folder, then back at him. I appreciate it, sir, but I need time. He studied her, to think about it. To make sure I'm teaching what matters, she said, not just what impresses. Royce nodded slowly. You always take the harder road, don't you? The quiet road, she corrected. It's slower, but it gets there. He chuckled softly. Take your time, the offer won't vanish. She stood, saluted lightly, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, he called after her. Lawson, you did something rare today. She stopped. What's that, sir? You made a room full of Marines listen without command. That's leadership. She gave a small, quiet smile. Leadership isn't volume, it's rhythm. And then she was gone. That evening, the range lights flickered on again, long after the ceremony had ended. The golden light of dusk stretched across the dirt, catching on the same steel plates she'd once turned into history. Hadley walked the line slowly, touching the rifles laid out for practice. Each had its quirks, tape here, chalk there, hand-adjusted stocks, all signs of progress. The Marines she'd trained were already setting up. No orders given, no announcements made. They just came to practice. Evening, ma'am, Monroe called out, smiling. We're running another team round, 100 targets, combined scores. Hadley nodded. Good, what's your goal? He grinned. Not perfect, repeatable. She smiled. Now you're thinking like a shooter. The first Marine stepped up, shoulders relaxed, breathing slow. Crack. A hit. Then another. Then another. The rhythm built, not frantic, not loud, just steady, patient, alive. Caraway stood beside her, hands in his pockets. You staying on, Lawson, taking the post. She watched the line, their focus, their discipline, their stillness. I don't know yet, she said softly. What'll decide it? She nodded toward the shooters. Whether they still need me. If they don't, that means I did my job. He chuckled. Ross used to say that too. Teach them until they don't need you. That's when you've done it right. She smiled faintly. He was a good teacher. The best, Caraway said. They watched together as the final Marine hit his last plate. Cheers rose, light and genuine. The scoreboard flashed, 85 out of 100. Personal best. The young Marine turned, grinning. Feel the difference, ma'am. She nodded. You stopped fighting the clock. He beamed. Yes, ma'am, I just shot my rhythm. That's it, she said softly. That's the whole lesson. As twilight deepened, Hadley packed her gear slowly. The Marines stayed behind, running drills by lantern light, each finding their pace. When she finally walked to her vehicle, the desert wind followed, warm and soft. Behind her, the sound of steady gunfire echoed through the dusk, not hurried, not desperate. Just rhythm. Monroe jogged up before she could start the engine, slightly out of breath. Ma'am, wait, you've got to see this. He held out his phone, showing a new recording. This morning, before you showed up, we ran another group set. 200 shots total. Combined score, 193. Hadley watched the video, calm shooters, steady breathing, synchronization. The rhythm was there. The silence between shots had become part of the music. She smiled faintly. You don't need me anymore. Monroe shook his head. We'll always need the lesson. She nodded once. The lesson stays, I don't have to. He stepped back as she started the engine. Keep practicing, she said quietly through the open window. Keep listening. The wind has more to teach you than I ever will. Then she drove away, slow, dust rising in her wake, golden light catching the edge of her rearview mirror. Behind her, the range stayed alive, the sound of shots and pauses, shots and pauses. Not chaos, not competition. Just rhythm. And on the scoreboard, the name still glowed softly in the dim light. 100/100 Lawson, H. No longer a challenge. Just a reminder of what happens when you stop fighting and start listening. How do you stay calm after the silence fades? The morning after she left Fort Ashid, the desert seemed to miss her. The range looked the same flags, same dust, same mirage, but without Hadley Lawson the air felt heavier, less sure of itself. Inside the tower, Caraway reviewed logs while Monroe ran drills with the team. They still used her phrases, conserve motion, listen longer, favor, don't fight. The rhythm stayed, but something was missing, the voice that didn't need to shout. Miles away, Hadley drove through the long, empty highway stretching east. Her truck's radio was off. The hum of the tires and the low whistle of crosswind filled the space instead. She liked it that way, quiet, minimal, clear. The road was her new range, the lines her targets, the distance her meditation. In the passenger seat sat a folded piece of paper, Colonel Royce's offer. Permanent instructor, full clearance, course authority. Her name typed neatly across the top, unsigned. She glanced at it once, then at the horizon. I'm not ready, she whispered. Not ready, or not sure she wanted to belong anywhere anymore. She reached a small desert town by noon. Nothing much there, gas station, diner, one-story motel with paint peeling off the walls. She checked in, carried her bag to a room that smelled faintly of dust and rain that hadn't fallen in months. Setting her gear down, she unpacked with the same precision she used for her rifle, methodical, deliberate. Notebook, cloth tape, chalk pouch, wind feather. Old habits die hard. She sat by the window, watching the desert heat ripple outside. For the first time in months, she wasn't training anyone, wasn't proving anything. And the quiet that once felt like peace, now felt like weight. She picked up her phone, no messages. Then again, she hadn't expected any. There's a strange loneliness in competence. When you're the one people look up to, there aren't many left to look sideways at. Hadley opened her notebook and wrote a single question on the blank page. What do I do when the lesson is over? She stared at it for a long time. Then quietly, keep listening. That night, she dreamed of Master Sergeant Halden Ross again. Same dream as always, the old training yard in Okinawa, his shadow framed by the rising sun. He was adjusting her stance, his hands steady, his tone calm. "You're forcing it, Lawson. Let the wind move you, not through you." In the dream, she argued, "I'm steady." "No," he said softly. "You're rigid, steady bends, rigid breaks." Then the dream changed. The wind grew louder. The flags tore from their poles. Ross turned toward her, his voice almost drowned out. "Don't let the silence become a wall, kid. Let it be a door." She woke up gasping, heart steady but her mind storming. The word stayed, a wall or a door. Outside, dawn hadn't yet arrived, but the air was shifting, cooler, restless. She got up, pulled on her jacket, and stepped outside. The desert was quiet except for the faint buzz of insects and the distant hum of an approaching military convoy. She watched the headlights crest the horizon, 3 vehicles moving fast. Instinct told her, not a routine patrol. When they stopped near the gas station, she recognized the man who stepped out. Colonel Royce. He spotted her immediately. "Could have guessed you wouldn't stay gone long," he said, half smiling. Hadley crossed her arms. "Technically, I didn't come back, you came to me." He laughed softly. "Fair point." Behind him, 2 younger officers unloaded a case from the vehicle, sealed, military grade. Royce motioned toward it. "We've got a situation," he said. "A test run. Classified wind adaptive range system. They want you to evaluate it, quietly." Hadley frowned. "Why me?" "Because you don't trust machines to do what only people can," he said. "And that's exactly why I trust you to test it." She hesitated. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll assume you're still listening to the wind," he replied. "But if you say yes, I'll assume you're ready to teach it something new." She thought for a long time, then nodded. "Where?" "Training Site 9, 2 hours north. You'll have the field alone." By midday, they arrived at the site, a remote stretch of land carved into the desert, bordered by concrete barriers and automated target pods. It looked alien compared to Fort Ashid, cold, technological, sterile. The air carried the same wind, but the sound was wrong, too mechanical. A test officer handed Hadley a headset. "AI-assisted range system," he explained. "Predictive wind algorithm. You feed it baseline data, it adjusts your hold dynamically. No need to read Mirage, no manual correction." Hadley raised an eyebrow. "No listening." He smiled. "No guessing." She didn't argue. She just took the rifle they offered, a sleek, carbon-frame prototype, and walked to the firing line. Royce watched silently from behind glass as she calibrated the system. The voice in her headset was soft, synthetic, confident. "Wind vector, 2.4 meters per second west-northwest, adjusting hold, ready when you are." She inhaled once, exhaled. Then fired. Clang. A perfect hit. The voice chirped again. "Target 2 ready, wind compensated." She fired again, hit. Over and over, perfect. Too perfect. Hadley's eyes narrowed. She felt disconnected. The rifle didn't breathe with her, it dictated. Each shot was sterile, clean, efficient, but lifeless. After 30 rounds, she pulled off the headset. "I'm done." The test officer blinked. "Ma'am, you're performing at 100% accuracy." "That's the problem," she said quietly. "You've replaced awareness with automation. It's not shooting anymore, it's pressing play." Royce folded his arms, half smiling. "Knew you'd say that." She turned to him. "You built something impressive, sir, but machines don't learn from mistakes, they just erase them." He nodded slowly. "And people. People evolve because of them." The silence between them said everything. The test officer looked uncomfortable. "With respect, ma'am, that's philosophy, not data." Hadley glanced at him. "Everything's philosophy before it becomes doctrine." He had no response. Later, sitting alone beside the truck, She cleaned her hands with a rag, staring at the dirt. Royce approached again, quieter this time. You know they'll keep building systems like that, he said. Faster, smarter, colder. I know. And you'll keep resisting them. She smiled faintly, not resisting, correcting. He nodded. You're like Ross in that way. Her eyes softened. He'd hate all this tech. He'd hate the arrogance of it, Royce said, but he'd respect the discipline it takes to reject it. Hadley didn't answer. She just looked at the sky, the light fading, the wind shifting again. Colonel, she said quietly, you ever think we're teaching silence to people who live in a world that doesn't stop shouting? Royce chuckled softly. That's why we need people like you. Someone has to prove that quiet still works. He handed her an envelope before heading back toward the convoy. For when you're ready, he said. She looked down. Inside was the same offer, permanent instructor, this time signed by the commandant himself. She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head with a small smile. Persistent, aren't you, sir? Persistent, he said, climbing into the vehicle, because some lessons are worth repeating. Then they drove off, leaving her alone again with the desert, the echo of engines fading into wind. Night fell quietly. Hadley sat on the truck bed, the stars scattered wide above her, cold, bright, infinite. The world was vast, and yet somehow it felt smaller every time she came back to it. She unfolded the commandant's letter under the dim moonlight. The words were formal, direct, but near the bottom was a single handwritten note from Royce. Perfection isn't what we need from you, Lawson. We need your patience. She smiled, barely, then folded the paper again and tucked it into her pocket. The wind picked up, brushing across her hair, moving through the desert brush like an old friend. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. You were right, Ross, she whispered into the night. Steady bends, rigid breaks. And somewhere between the stars and the dust, she thought she heard him answer. Then keep bending, kid. Hadley smiled. It wasn't happiness. It was something deeper, the peace of someone who knew she still had work to do. She leaned back against the truck, rifle beside her, and watched the horizon shift as the first hint of dawn touched the sky. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't a wall. It was a door. And she was ready to walk through it. How do you teach silence to a world that refuses to listen? When Hadley Lawson returned to Fort Ashid 3 weeks later, the range didn't look the same. There were new structures, small black towers at every 200-meter mark. The Marines called them whisper posts, part of the automated wind-adaptive system she had tested and rejected. They blinked faintly under the morning light, like artificial stars planted in the sand. The old flags were gone. No more cloth in the wind, no more rhythm in the air. The range had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel alive. Caraway met her at the gate. He looked older, though it hadn't even been a month. His uniform was pressed, but his eyes were tired. Didn't think you'd come back, he said. I almost didn't, she replied. He followed her gaze down the range. They installed the system. Command pushed it through after you left. AI reads the field, calls adjustments. Shooters just aim and pull. She didn't answer, just watch one of the new recruits firing. Each shot landed perfect. Every single one. No misses. And yet no one cheered. Hadley's voice was soft. They're not learning, they're performing. Caraway exhaled. Yeah, that's what bothers me. The word bother felt small for what both of them were thinking. Inside the control tower, Colonel Royce stood near a screen glowing with data, wind graphs, target maps, machine telemetry. His uniform jacket hung over the back of a chair, his sleeves rolled up. He looked up when she entered. Lawson, he said simply, you came. I read your letter, she replied. You said you needed patience. He smiled faintly. We always do. She studied the screens. How long before no one remembers what wind feels like? Royce leaned against the console. Command thinks this system saves lives, removes human error. They're not wrong. No, she said quietly, they're just incomplete. He tilted his head. Explain. Hadley walked closer, eyes tracing the glowing data. Human error isn't always failure. Sometimes it's the only way we learn what not to repeat. You take away the possibility of error, you take away growth. Royce nodded slowly. You sound like Ross. I should, she said softly. He earned that right. He crossed his arms. Command's sending a delegation next week to observe the new program. I want you here, not as a critic, as a counterpoint. Her eyes narrowed. You want me to represent the human side. I want you to remind them why the human side matters. Hadley sighed, and if they don't listen. Royce smiled faintly. Then we let the wind do the talking. That evening she walked downrange alone. The whisper posts emitted a soft electronic hum, each one spinning slowly to measure the air. She stopped at the 600-meter mark and stood there, listening, but the familiar dialogue was gone. No flags, no song of wind, just numbers, sensors, silence. She crouched, scooping a handful of dust, letting it fall. The grains scattered differently, lighter, uneven. The new posts were disrupting natural flow. Artificial rhythm, she thought, predictable but wrong. The next morning, she gathered the Marines for an early drill. The AI system had been running all week, and every trainee boasted perfect accuracy. Confidence radiated, but it wasn't earned. It was manufactured. She stood before them, expression calm, hands behind her back. You've all hit perfect strings this week, she said evenly. Feels good, doesn't it? Nods, proud smiles. Now let's see what happens when you lose the voice telling you what to do. A ripple of uncertainty. She turned toward the tower. Kill the feed. The tech hesitated. Ma'am, command ordered. Royce's voice came from behind her. Do it. The screens flickered. The whisper posts went dark. For the first time in a week, the field went still. Hadley looked back at the group. No algorithms, no prompts, just you and the wind. She crouched to the dirt, planted a paper feather, and watched it lean slightly. Remember this, she asked quietly. Now listen. They took their positions, uneasy. The first Marine fired, miss. Then another, miss. Frustration rippled through the line. Hadley walked behind them slowly. The air hasn't changed, she said. You did, you stopped hearing it. You let a machine listen for you. The next shooter adjusted slightly, waited longer, breath slower. Clang, hit. Hadley nodded once. Now you're talking to it again. By the 10th shot, the group found rhythm. The misses shrank. The confidence that had been artificial began to rebuild, this time real, earned. Caraway watched from the tower, shaking his head with a grin. She's undoing Command's new miracle in one morning, he muttered. Royce didn't respond. He just watched, proud, thoughtful. When the drill ended, the board showed 68 out of 100. Not perfect, but honest. Hadley faced them. Machines can teach you to hit, but they can't teach you why you missed. That's where skill lives, in interpretation, not automation. One Marine raised his hand. Ma'am, command says AI saves lives. She nodded. So does patience, so does humility. The question is which one lasts longer. Later in the command office, Royce closed the door behind them. You know that stunt won't sit well with the delegation, he said, though his voice held amusement. They needed to feel the difference, she said. That's what data can't show, the silence between hits. Royce leaned back. You ever notice you win arguments by refusing to have them? She smiled faintly. I'm just stubborn quietly. He laughed softly, then his tone turned thoughtful. You think the system can coexist with your method? Yes, she said simply, but only if it learns to listen first. Royce raised an eyebrow. Machines can't listen. Then the people running them will have to. The next week arrived faster than expected. Command vehicles rolled in polished, loud, efficient. Delegates in pressed uniforms and mirrored sunglasses. They didn't see the dirt. They saw funding, progress, success metrics. Colonel Royce greeted them formally, walking them to the tower where data screens displayed AI results. 100 green lights, 0 misses. Outstanding performance, one officer said. Flawless consistency. Hadley stood behind them, silent. Another officer glanced at her. You're the civilian marksman, correct? The one who shot the original Centurion string. Yes, sir. He smiled thinly. Your demonstration helped build the case for automation. We modeled the AI algorithm partially on your telemetry patterns. She blinked once. You modeled perfection, not understanding. He frowned slightly. What's the difference? She stepped forward, eyes steady. Perfection doesn't teach anyone. It just ends the conversation. The officer shifted, uncomfortable. The conversation is about results. Then you're missing half the story, she said. The half that learns through failure. Royce's mouth twitched, trying to hide a smirk. The officer cleared his throat. Colonel, perhaps we could see a demonstration, manual versus automated. Royce looked at Hadley. She gave a small nod. The test began. The AI team fired first, flawless again. Cold, mechanical, sterile. Then Hadley's team stepped up, no sensors, no feed. Only human eyes and wind. The first few targets misses. A few whispers from the delegation. Then the rhythm returned. Breath, wind, patience. Hits began stacking. By the final string, both teams stood close, 95 for AI, 91 for Hadley's group. The delegates clapped politely. Remarkable, one said, though the AI still leads. Hadley stepped forward, her voice calm. Check time stamps. The tech did. AI team 2 minutes faster. Hadley's team twice as slow. She smiled faintly. That's the difference. They rushed, we listened. Royce turned toward the delegation. Her shooters are slower, yes, but they're learning a discipline your machines can't measure, the ability to remain calm when the world shifts. One of the officers murmured, calm doesn't win battles. Hadley looked at him, it prevents them. The room fell quiet. That night, long after the convoy left, Hadley stood alone again at the 900-meter line. The stars shimmered above the dark horizon. The whisper post stood silent now, powered down at her request. She liked them better that way. Caraway joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. You realize command won't stop building these systems, right? I know, she said, but as long as they build them, someone has to remind them what they're replacing. He smiled. You volunteering for that job? She looked downrange, the faint desert wind brushing her cheek. I think I already did. They stood in silence a while, sipping coffee, watching the dark shapes of the targets fade under starlight. After a moment, Caraway said, You ever get tired of proving your point, Lawson? She smiled slightly. I'm not proving anything, I'm preserving something. What's that? The part of us that still needs to listen. When she walked back toward the barracks later, the night was cool, the stars unblinking. She paused once, looking back at the range. The machines were still, the wind alive again. She smiled. For now, the silence had won. What happens when the students start to listen better than their teacher? The morning air at Fort Ashid carried that early winter clarity, the kind that sharpened sound. You could hear the metallic echo of each bolt, each shot, miles away. The range was alive again, but this time the rhythm was different. Measured, thoughtful, human. Hadley Lawson watched from the tower window as the new class lined up. They weren't hers yet, not until they understood the silence, but the sight of them stirred something deeper than pride, a quiet ache. Caraway joined her, mug in hand. New batch looks green, he said. Good, she answered. Green still listens. He smiled. You think command will keep sending them. As long as someone's willing to teach them patience, she said. It's cheaper than rebuilding arrogance. Below the youngest recruit, a kid barely 20 fumbled his rifle's magazine. It clattered onto the dirt. He froze, expecting the usual bark of correction. Hadley's voice drifted over the speaker instead. Pick it up slow, start again. No anger, no shame, just direction. The boy swallowed, nodded, and did exactly that. Caraway raised an eyebrow. You're softer than you used to be. No, she said quietly, just older. Softer is different from weaker. Training lasted until the sun reached its cruelest angle. Heat shimmered, sweat turned to salt, and rifles grew hot enough to burn. Hadley moved among them like a metronome of calm, correcting a wrist here, a breathing rhythm there. Each Marine received only a sentence or two. She never overwhelmed them. She guided them. At the far end of the line, the same young Marine, Private Reese, struggled. His shots scattered wide. He shook his head, frustrated. Hadley knelt beside him. "What are you fighting?" she asked. He blinked. "Ma'am. You're pulling hard right every shot. That's not the rifle, that's you." He sighed. I don't want to mess up again." "Then you already have," she said, but her tone was gentle. "Fear's a hand on the barrel. You can't aim with it gripping you." He looked down. "Everyone's watching." She leaned closer, voice lower. "Then give them something worth watching." He nodded, inhaled, and fired again. Clang, center. The other Marines glanced over. Hadley stood slowly. "That's what happens when you stop apologizing to your weapon," she said. "It forgives faster than you do." Caraway chuckled from behind the scope. "You keep talking like that, they'll start quoting you on T-shirts." "Then maybe they'll remember," she replied. That evening the mess hall buzzed with soft conversation. Not rowdy laughter like before, just quiet camaraderie. Marines compared notes instead of scores. The walls held less tension, more respect. Hadley sat alone at first, notebook open. She wasn't writing data, just phrases, fragments, things she didn't want to forget. Stillness is the reload of the mind. Ego fires faster than breath. Teach them to fail forward. Reese approached hesitantly, tray in hand. "Mind if I sit, ma'am?" "Go ahead." He sat, nervous but curious. "How did you learn all this?" Hadley smiled faintly. "By missing." He frowned. "You never miss." "Every day," she said, "just not always with bullets." He looked puzzled, and she didn't explain. Some lessons were meant to linger. After a long pause, he said, "I heard you trained under a legend." She nodded. "Halden Ross. He believed the target was a mirror. Whatever you bring to it, it shows you back. Anger, fear, pride, they all print on the steel." Reese thought about that. "So if I stay calm, it'll show calm." "It'll show truth," she corrected. "Calm helps, but truth is better." He smiled awkwardly. "Guess that's harder." "The good things always are." Later that night, after the hall emptied, Caraway found her still sitting there. Notebook closed now, eyes distant. "Ross would have been proud," he said. Hadley exhaled. Tell me I still talk too much." Caraway laughed softly. "You, hardly." She leaned back, the chair creaking. "Sometimes I wonder if teaching makes you softer because you start seeing yourself in every mistake." "That's not soft," he said. "That's empathy." She looked at him. Same thing, different uniform. A week passed. The Marines' scores climbed. Reese, once the worst shot, became the most consistent, never the fastest, never perfect, but calm. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the desert, rare, violent, sudden. The range crew ordered everyone under cover. Hadley didn't move. She stood at the 700-meter mark, rain slicing sideways, wind howling. She raised her scope to the horizon and smiled. "This," she whispered, "is when you really learn." Reese ran toward her, shouting through the gust, "Ma'am, you're supposed to be inside." She laughed. a sound so unfamiliar even she was surprised by it. The wind's alive again, you can hear it. He reached her, soaked, shivering. We can't see a thing. That's the point, she said, handing him the rifle. Shoot by feel, trust the rhythm. He hesitated, then shouldered the weapon, breathing like she taught him. The wind screamed, the rain stung. Crack! A second later, clang, hit. His eyes widened. I actually hit it. She grinned. Now you know what listening sounds like. When they finally made it back under the shelter, both were drenched, laughing. Caraway shook his head. You're insane, Lawson. Maybe, she said, but they'll remember that shot longer than any perfect day. That night, power flickered across the base. The storm knocked half the systems offline, including the whisper posts. Hadley walked the dark corridor toward the tower, flashlight in hand. The hum of generators echoed like distant thunder. Royce was there already, staring out at the black range. Only the moon lit the steel targets. No tech, he said. No lights, feels like the old days. Hadley stood beside him, the real ones. He nodded. You did good with them, Lawson. Command noticed. She sighed. That usually means trouble. He chuckled. They're offering you a choice. Head instructor here, or rotation lead for the new joint training base overseas. Bigger pay, more influence. She was quiet for a long moment. Which one needs me more? He studied her profile in the dim light. The one that still listens. She smiled faintly. Then I guess I'm staying. Royce extended a hand. Welcome home, Instructor Lawson. She shook it firmly. Let's just call me Hadley. He laughed. Not to me, we won't. Over the following days, the storm's aftermath forced manual operations again. Without automation, shooters relearned patience. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Nature had shut down the machines so humans could hear themselves again. One evening, Reese approached her during cleanup. Ma'am, he said, I wrote something. He handed her a scrap of paper. On it. Silence isn't empty. It's where the bullet decides who you are. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into her pocket. Keep writing, she said, even if no one reads it. Why? Because the best lessons start as whispers. He nodded, understanding more than he realized. When the range lights came back online, Fort Ashid returned to its normal rhythm, but the tone was different. Less shouting, more breathing. Caraway called it the Lawson effect. Hadley hated the name. This isn't about me, she told him. It's about continuity. They'll teach others, and one day my name won't mean a thing. That's how it's supposed to work. He smirked. You really don't like credit, do you? Credit's loud, she said. I prefer echoes. That weekend, a letter arrived for her. Official seal, commandant's signature. Not an order, a thank you. Inside was a single line written by Royce in ink. Somewhere between technology and instinct, you built a bridge. Don't stop walking it. She read it twice, smiled, and pinned it above her desk. That night she sat by the window of her small quarters, watching dust drift under the floodlights. Her rifle rested nearby, cleaned, oiled, silent. She whispered, You were right again, Ross. It's not about hitting, it's about hearing. The wind outside shifted slightly, as if answering. The next morning, she found Reese already at the range before dawn. Couldn't sleep, she asked. He shook his head. I wanted to see what the world sounds like before everyone wakes up. Hadley smiled. Quiet, isn't it? He nodded, scary too. That's how you know it's real, she said. The world makes its own noise. You just have to decide which parts to keep. He looked at her, confused but inspired. Are you ever scared? Every day, she said softly. I just don't let fear choose where I aim. By evening, word spread that command had restored full automation privileges. Whisper posts flickered back to life. The hum returned. Reese asked, Does that mean we stop manual drills? Hadley shook her head. No, it means now we learn balance. He frowned. Between what? Between knowing and trusting, she said. The hardest line to walk. That night she walked alone again to the farthest target, 900 meters. The desert was cooling, sky burning orange. The machines whirred softly, scanning the air. She placed her palm on the steel plate, still scarred from her perfect run months before. The dent had weathered, softened, almost disappeared. Perfection fades, she thought, but the echo never does. She stood there a long while, until the wind began to sing again. Sometimes it roared, sometimes it whispered. But tonight it sounded like memory. As she headed back toward the base lights, her shadow stretched long across the dirt, steady, balanced, still. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was walking away from something. She was walking with it. The silence had stopped being a burden. It had become her language. How do you leave behind a place that finally started to understand you? The dawn at Fort Ashid came slow that morning, soft, hesitant, the kind of light that seemed to know goodbyes were in the air. The wind was calm, not yet awake. It brushed across the range gently, as if whispering its approval before the world got noisy again. Hadley Lawson stood at the edge of the firing line, her duffel by her feet. She wore no insignia now, no tags, no rank, just a plain jacket faded from years of sun. In front of her stretched the field she had reshaped, the place that had once doubted her, tested her, then learned to listen. Every plate out there still bore marks of lessons learned, scratches, dents, clean circles of impact. They were scars of understanding, not perfection. Caraway joined her, carrying 2 coffees. He handed her one without a word. "You really leaving?" he asked finally. Hadley nodded. "Yeah, it's time." He sipped his coffee, studying her. "You built something here, Lawson. Kind of feels like you're walking out on it." She smiled faintly. "I'm not walking out, I'm letting it stand." He chuckled. "You sound like Ross again." "I hope so," she said softly. They stood together in silence, watching the first group of new recruits assemble in the distance. Among them, Reese, standing tall, steady, calm. He was helping another Marine adjust her rifle stance, repeating something quietly that Hadley had said weeks ago. Caraway noticed it too. "Looks like the echo's working." She smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." Inside the tower, Colonel Royce waited. He didn't salute when she entered. They were long past formalities. "Got the official clearance for your next assignment," he said, sliding a sealed folder across the desk. "It's civilian adjacent. Wind data consultancy for joint training zones overseas. Flexible, quiet. I figured you'd like that last part." Hadley glanced at it, then set it aside. "Command making peace with me." He smiled. Command never admits defeat. They just learn to redefine success. She smirked. "Then I guess I won." "Or maybe we all did," he said. "The system's staying, but so are your drills. Half the units run hybrid training now, human interpretation first, automation second." "That's balance," she said. "That's you," he corrected. There was a moment of stillness, the kind where words would only break what silence already said perfectly. Royce finally reached into his drawer and handed her something small, a single spent casing, polished, engraved faintly with words. She read them aloud. "Steady bends, rigid brakes." Her eyes softened. "You kept it." "It's from your first day here," he said. "Figured it belonged to the one who taught us all to listen." Hadley closed her fingers around it, the cool brass pressing against her palm. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not trying to change my silence." He smiled. "Would have been a losing fight." Outside, the day brightened. The recruits' rifles began cracking across the desert, echoing off the distant hills. The sound was steady now, disciplined, rhythmic, alive. Hadley walked toward her truck. Reese spotted her from downrange and jogged over, breathless. "You're really going, ma'am?" he asked. "I am." He hesitated, then said, "What if we forget how to listen?" She smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Then you'll teach each other. That's how it works." He nodded, trying to mask the emotion. "Thank you for everything." She tilted her head slightly. "Don't thank me, just pass it on." He gave a firm nod. "Yes, ma'am." Then he straightened and ran back to the line, not looking back this time. Hadley watched him go, pride softening into something deeper. That quiet ache again, but this time it felt right. She climbed into her truck, engine low and steady, and drove out across the dirt road that led away from Fort Ashid. The wind picked up behind her, carrying the faint ring of steel down rain, the sound of new shooters learning to breathe. The highway stretched endless ahead. Sunlight glimmered across the desert like memory. Her rearview mirror framed the base growing smaller, then fading altogether. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to reach for a rifle. Her weapon had become her words, her silence. She turned the radio on static, then music, a slow instrumental piece that felt like wind over glass. She let it play, one hand tapping gently on the steering wheel in rhythm. Halfway down the road, she stopped the truck and stepped out. The air was wide, open, infinite. She walked a few paces away and looked around. No buildings, no sound but the desert itself. Then from the horizon, the faint whistle of crosswind, soft, deliberate. She raised her hand, palm out, feeling its pressure shift across her fingers. "Still here," she whispered. She smiled, small and quiet. The kind of smile that belonged to people who had finally stopped running. Weeks passed. She traveled between remote outposts, teaching small units how to integrate patience into precision. She carried no title, no name tag, just a reputation that arrived before she did. The Marines called her the Whisperer, a civilian nickname that spread faster than she liked. She never corrected them, she didn't have to. Wherever she went, scores rose. Tempers fell. Teams learned to read the wind before firing. Her methods reached beyond the range. They seeped into briefings, patrols, even the way soldiers spoke to one another, quieter, steadier, listening more. That was her legacy, not a record, a rhythm. One afternoon, months later, she found herself on a mountain pass in the north, a NATO cross-training base where engineers had installed the newest AI marksman systems. They invited her to observe. She watched the young operators set up their consoles, eyes glued to screens instead of horizons. During a break, one of them, a woman, maybe 19, approached her shyly. "Ma'am, are you really the one who shot that 100-400 string?" Hadley smiled softly. "Once." "How'd you do it?" She paused, considering. "By missing enough times before that day to know what the wind sounds like when it forgives you." The girl looked confused, then fascinated. "The wind forgives." "Always," Hadley said. "You just have to admit when you stopped listening." That night, as the base quieted, she stood outside her quarters and listened again. The same wind, same stars, only colder, older, but it still spoke. It always did. A year later, back in the States, she received a small package with no sender listed. Inside was a photograph, Fort Ashid's range, dusk light cutting across the sand. The new instructor stood with a class in formation. In the bottom corner, written in neat handwriting, "The silence still works, Reese." Hadley smiled, setting the photo on her shelf beside the engraved casing. For a moment she just sat there, the weight of everything she'd taught and unlearned settling gently inside her. She realized something then. Legacy isn't what people remember about you. It's what they do without you. And that was enough. Months later, a journalist reached out, asking to interview the legendary marksman who taught silence to Marines. She declined politely. No need for headlines. The story didn't belong in ink. It belonged in dust, wind, and echo. That night rain began to fall outside her cabin. Not a storm, just a steady, cleansing drizzle. She opened the window, letting the cool air in. On the table beside her sat her old rifle, cleaned, retired, no longer needed but never forgotten. She traced a finger along its stock, whispering almost to herself, "You can rest now." The rain answered softly, tapping like slow applause. In the morning, she took that same rifle up a hill behind her cabin. The fog was thick, the world gray. She set up a single steel plate at 600 meters. No witnesses, no cameras, no purpose but one. She breathed, aimed, and fired. The shot rang through the valley, echoing again and again, fading into silence. She smiled, lowering the weapon. "One last conversation," she murmured. Then she turned away, leaving the target standing, unpainted, unmarked, waiting for someone else to listen next. Back at the cabin, she wrote her final note in her old, battered notebook. You don't borrow someone's rifle to prove you can shoot. You borrow it to prove that silence still matters. She closed the book, set it beside the rifle, and poured herself coffee. Outside, the fog began to lift. Sunlight spilled across the grass, and for a brief, fleeting second, the wind carried a familiar whisper. She smiled at the sound, that same rhythm, that same memory of a voice long gone. Steady bends, rigid breaks. She whispered back, still bending. And then she just sat there still, quiet, alive, as the world turned slow and forgiving once more. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.